This presentation explores a few of the ramifications of the adolescent brain growing up using high-speed internet porn. Let's start with the most dramatic phenomenon showing up in some of today's young porn users: porn-induced erectile dysfunction. A few years ago, guys on many diverse forums began complaining of chronic, unexplained erectile dysfunction. All were heavy porn users. Amazingly, the cause of their problems appeared to be internet porn. Why do I say this? Because they generally recovered after about 2 months of no porn fantasy, and little or no masturbation and orgasm. They call it rebooting. In February 2011, urology professor Carlo Foresta noticed the same phenomenon in Italy. In a press release describing the results of a large survey, he said, "It starts with lower reaction to porn sites, then there is a general drop in libido, and in the end it becomes impossible to get an erection." Unquote. More recently, a popular U.S. medical show, Dr. Oz, did a program on porn-induced ED. Urologist Andrew Kramer, the guy in the red tie, advised that erectile function can return in as little as 1 month without masturbation to porn. However, the porn-related phenomenon has been rapidly shifting. The earliest guys to complain of the problem were typically computer wizards or IT specialists. They had acquired high-speed internet porn ahead of the pack and then developed uncharacteristic delayed ejaculation, or ED, during sex. Some had ED even while using porn. Nearly all were in their late 20s or older. Soon we began to notice two unexpected trends with porn-induced ED. Number one, a flood of younger guys in their early 20s, late teens showed up with the same sexual problems. Rapidly, they comprised the majority of visitors to the websites where men were complaining of these porn-induced sexual problems. Number two, unlike older guys who needed 2 months or less, young guys needed 3 to 6 months, maybe even 9 months or longer to recover from porn-induced ED. Another difference, older guys are usually completely healed once their erections return. Young guys often continue to see improvements even after their erections return. Now this leads to an obvious question. Why does a guy age 50 recover much faster and more solidly than, say, a 23-year-old, especially when the 50-year-old has been using porn a lot longer than the 23-year-old, sometimes for 30 years or more, and the 50-year-old has lower testosterone, and the 50-year-old has less dopamine. Dopamine in the brain is what powers erections and drives libido, and he has older blood vessels. The main cause of organic ED is inadequate blood flow. Basically, he has older everything, such as nerves and genital muscles. And this last one seems strange, but older guys can occasionally orgasm during their reboot, and it doesn't set them back the same way it does many of the young guys. So why does a guy age 50 recover much faster and more solidly? The young guy spent his adolescence wiring his sexual response to high-speed internet porn, and the 50-year-old did not. Consider this a natural outcome of the highly malleable adolescent brain conditioning itself to today's high-speed internet porn. Now, this presentation isn't really about ED, it's about sexual conditioning. However, unprecedented ED in young men is strong evidence that internet porn can powerfully condition sexuality. Let us consider our 50-year-old who recovered quickly and easily from porn-induced ED. What did he wire his sexual arousal to? Well, he began his adolescent masturbation career maybe with a catalog, or a TV star, or a magazine, if he could find one, or the most likely scenario, using his imagination, maybe fantasizing about the girls at school. If you are 12, 13, 14, and you have never had a sexual experience, what are you going to fantasize about when you are masturbating? If you grew up in the 70s, maybe it was kissing a girl in your class, maybe it was a girl touching you, perhaps feeling up Farrah Fawcett. All are age appropriate. Today, a 13-year-old's imagination is replaced by hardcore streaming videos of people engaged in all sorts of crazy stuff. None of it is age appropriate. Maybe it's not appropriate for any age, and little of it resembles real sexual encounters. Instead of wiring his sexual arousal to real people, today's adolescent is often found in front of a screen, and he's wiring his brain's sexual circuits to being alone in his room, voyeurism rather than participation, continuously searching and seeking for the next thing and the next thing, multiple tabs, maybe 10, 20 tabs open, each with a 3-minute HD video, shock and surprise. We know how teen boys love to be grossed out. Multiple porn stars per session or per video, fetishes of every imaginable and unimaginable type. This is like trying to learn how to play football by shooting free throws on a basketball court. But it's more than just training for the wrong sport. Using porn is replacing these guys' ability to play the sport they really want to learn. The following quote highlights the key difference between our 23-year-old and 50-year-old. Sexual conditioning. I'm 25 now, but I've had high-speed internet access and started streaming porn videos since age 12. My sexual experience is very limited, and the few times I've had sex have been total disappointments, no erection. Been trying to quit for 5 months now and finally have. I realize that I've been conditioned to the point where my sexual urges are deeply linked to a computer screen. Women don't turn me on unless they are made 2D and behind my glass monitor, unquote. Now let's get back to what the 50-year-old and the 23-year-old had in common. As I said, dopamine is a major player in libido and in erections. In both the old and the young guy, porn-induced ED seems to be related to reduced dopamine signaling. That is, there's less dopamine released and fewer dopamine receptors. One term for this is desensitization. Reduced dopamine signaling, or desensitization, is one of many brain changes caused by addiction. The purple pathway is a simplified picture of the reward circuit. Desensitization and many other addiction-related brain changes occur here. This ancient circuit is shared by all mammals. Its purpose is to urge us to repeat behaviors that further our survival or the survival of our genes, such as eating and, of course, sex. It does this with the help of dopamine. Here's how dopamine powers erections. When you are sexually excited, the red dot, which is the heart of the reward circuit, fires up and sends dopamine signals down to the hypothalamus, which is the blue dot. The hypothalamus erection centers send signals streaming down the spinal cord to the penis, producing and sustaining an erection. Here's the key point. If dopamine signaling is well below normal, either in the red dot, called the nucleus accumbens, or the hypothalamus, the message is weak, and so are erections. A new Italian study confirmed this hypothesis. Scientists compared 2 groups of men with erectile dysfunction. First, they had men with an obvious physical cause, and then secondly, they had men without any known physical cause. The group without a known cause had less gray matter, which means fewer nerve connections. Guess which parts of the brain were affected? The reward center in red, the hypothalamus in blue. Less gray matter translates into less dopamine signaling, which is desensitization, a major player in porn-induced sexual problems. If desensitization were the only factor in porn-induced ED, younger guys would recover a whole lot faster than older guys. So we are back to the other factor, sexual conditioning that naturally occurs during adolescence, when the brain is primed to learn all about reproduction. Which is what this presentation is really about. Brains, not penises. So, back to the brain. The neurobiology of sexual conditioning revolves around a crucial detail. Nerve cells that fire together, wire together. For an adolescent brain, this means connecting sexual excitement experienced in the reward circuit to whatever is causing it in the environment. So we have to ask, what is the impact of this evolutionarily new sexual stimulus, internet porn, during this critical window of brain development? I say critical because research is revealing that it's surprisingly easy to condition sexuality in young mammals, and the experience of many of today's young porn users is affirming this research. Consider this research, recounted in Jim Faust's review of sexual conditioning, who, what, where, when, and maybe even why, how the experience of sexual reward connects sexual desire, preference, and performance. I call this experiment, so this is how you do it. Scientists introduced a receptive female to a male and then a minute later yanked her out of his cage. With enough repetitions, this conditioned the young male to ejaculate much faster than normal. How did these rapid ejaculators behave when given all the time in the world? Well, they continue to be rapid ejaculators. The key point here is early sexual conditioning remained even when circumstances changed. How did this same sexual conditioning affect experienced males who learned sex at normal speeds? Sure, they learned to become rapid ejaculators, but this was temporary. Once they were allowed uninterrupted access to females, the experienced males returned to their normal mating habits. If staring at a computer is the answer to the question, so this is how you do it? Could early sexual conditioning help explain why young guys with porn-induced ED often need longer to recover? Here's a guy in his early 20s. Alien is the word I'd use to describe how it felt when I tried to have sex with real women. It felt artificial and foreign to me. It's like I've gotten so conditioned to sitting in front of a screen jerking it that my mind considers that to be normal sex instead of real, actual sex, unquote. Here's another experiment. I call this one, What Was Aversive Became Erotic. Researcher Jim Faust sprayed female rats with the odor of rotting flesh. This is called cadaverine. Normally, rats avoid decaying flesh. It's innate. It's not a learned behavior. They will bury dead bodies and wooden dowels soaked in cadaverine. Next, he placed the smelly but willing females into cages with young virgin males. With their dopamine soaring, the virgin males mated and ejaculated several times. A few days later, the young male rats were placed in a cage with normal-smelling females and females smelling like death. The cadaverine-conditioned males mated with both the non-stinky females and the stinky females. When unconditioned normal males were given full access to both types of females, they wouldn't go near the females that stank of death. How deep was the conditioning? A few days later, the conditioned ex-virgins received a wooden dowel saturated in cadaverine. They played with it and gnawed on it just as they would if the dowel had been laced with something they normally love, such as chocolate or vaginal secretions. As researcher Jim Faust says, this finding may have implications for the formation of sexual paraphilias in humans that might otherwise be perceived as aversive. End quote. Faust is saying that early sexual experience has the power to wire in all kinds of fetishes, including stuff that would normally be repugnant. This could also explain why some porn users end up baffled or distressed by the porn they have escalated to in their search for more and more stimulation. These next two guys are describing their fetishes fading after eliminating porn. First guy, I looked at weird porn when I was masturbating, porn that disgusted me after I watched it. The brain always goes to more extreme porn to get off. I don't think they were true fetishes because if those things had actually happened in front of me, I would have left the room. I won't go back to porn ever because after my last relapse, it took only 2 weeks to go from normal porn all the way back to the really weird porn. End quote. Second guy, I've been into female wedgies, bondage, humiliation, and ENF since my sophomore year of high school. Ruined a few relationships because of it. Since quitting, there are weeks now where it doesn't even enter my mind. End quote. Really get that guys may not be sure of their true taste until after they quit porn. What is behind the acquisition of porn tastes? It appears to be sexual conditioning. What is the driving force behind sexual conditioning? All evidence points to dopamine. This experiment really shows us the power of dopamine in sexual conditioning, in that a virgin male can be conditioned to prefer a same-sex partner. Researchers injected a male rat with a drug that mimics dopamine, thus imitating the buzz of sexual excitement, and then placed him in a cage with another male. The two rats just hung out together for a day. That's the time it takes for the drug to leave the system. The researchers then repeated this process 2 more times, 4 days apart. A few days later, the reconditioned male was offered a choice. With no drug in his system, he entered a cage with access to both his male buddy and a sexually receptive female. Guess which rat turned him on the most? He showed much more response to the male, more erections, more genital investigation, and even female-like solicitations as opposed to normal male mounting behavior. The researchers said the rat was not gay because he didn't try to mount the other rat. You might find this surprising, but some porn users report escalating over time to porn that does not match their innate sexual orientation. Take these two guys, for example. First guy, I used to think I was bisexual with a foot fetish. Now it disgusts me. I'm straight and like girls, not feet. No offense to anyone who has any other preferences. Does anyone else feel like the part of their brain with all those fetishes and stuff is just going away? End quote. Second guy, I became addicted to internet porn in my late teens. Gay sex to me is very normal and natural, but I lost interest in it over time. I became interested in straight porn and found myself increasingly losing interest in the male anatomy and developing a fetish for female genitalia. I decided to stop watching porn, and after quite some time, I can happily say my fetish for women has gone. Gay sex has returned to be the norm for me. End quote. Their innate orientation had not changed, but constant reinforcement while in a high dopamine state altered what type of porn turned them on. Acquiring new porn fetishes or taste is not that unusual. In 2012, approximately 1,500 guys responded to a lengthy survey on the popular Reddit.com site. As you can see, 56% of them reported that their porn taste had become increasingly extreme or deviant. 24% were bothered by this, 32% were not. Psychiatrist Norman Doidge explains what was going on. This is from his bestseller, The Brain That Changes Itself. The content of what patients found exciting changed as the websites introduced themes and scripts that altered their brains without their awareness. Because plasticity is competitive, the brain maps for new, exciting images increased at the expense of what had previously attracted them. Here's a good way to visualize Deutsch's comment. Adding internet porn into the mix creates competing sexual pathways. It's a type of natural selection. Sure, Jessica in algebra is cute, but if a 13-year-old is masturbating every day to gangbangs, cream pies, or double penetration, the Jessica pathways will have a difficult time keeping up. Here's why. He's not masturbating to thoughts of Jessica, but to porn. His brain is constantly reinforcing the stimuli he associates with masturbation and ejaculation. Remember, nerve cells that fire together wire together, whether it's cadaverine plus ejaculation or hardcore videos plus masturbation. This yellow arrow is more than just a cartoon. Those red lines are nerve pathways growing stronger and more efficient. In other words, nerve cells that fire together are wiring together. And what helps them wire together and facilitates sexual conditioning is a unique molecule called delta-phos-B. But didn't I say that dopamine was the driving force behind sexual conditioning? It is. Dopamine surges are the trigger for the reward circuit to produce delta-phos-B. And delta-phos-B accumulates in proportion to the amount of dopamine released. This image shows how delta-phos-B accumulates with chronic overconsumption. What's unique about delta-phos-B is that it hangs around in the brain for a long time. As delta-phos-B levels rise, this rewires the brain to want it, whatever it is. Now this can create a circular process of wanting, leading to doing, and more surges of dopamine, which triggers the production of more delta phosphate, and so on. Simply put, delta phosphate's job is to have us remember and to repeat. Its message is, this activity is really, really important and you should do it again and again. Delta phosphate accomplishes this by wiring together the sights, the sounds, the emotions, sensations, and memories associated with a big reward, such as climax, and creates a circuit that can blast our reward center. When activated, this circuit creates feelings of wanting or even cravings. Analogy time. Dopamine is like the foreman for a highway construction crew, and the workers are like delta phosphate. Dopamine barks the order saying connect these experiences together, but delta phosphate builds the highways. Here's the key. Long after delta phosphate vanishes, the wanting circuits remain just as the roads remain after the construction crew leaves for the next job. These brain highways or circuits are why early sexual experience can have such a powerful and lasting effect. Where else does this same process occur? It occurs with all addictions. Chronic overconsumption of drugs or natural rewards keeps dopamine elevated, which leads to the accumulation of delta phosphate and rewires brain pathways to crave it. For example, long after an alcoholic is sober, a trigger can activate an old addiction pathway, which causes cravings and is the mechanism behind relapses. Sensitization is the technical term for the construction of these deeply entrenched addiction pathways. As you can see from this 2001 study, it's been known for quite a while that delta phosphate is the master switch for addiction. But obviously, the delta phosphate switch did not evolve to help us get addicted to stuff. As several later studies discovered, delta phosphate's true function is to urge animals to pursue high-fat, high-sugar foods and sexual opportunities. Now that makes evolutionary sense. What also makes evolutionary sense is for an adolescent to quickly learn all about sex and remember the details, so he can improve his chances whenever an opportunity presents itself. By 2010, several more studies affirmed that delta phosphate was behind the long-term brain and behavioral changes that occur with sexual conditioning. And earlier this year, this study put it all together. Quote, natural and drug rewards not only converge on the same neural pathway, they converge on the same molecular mediators and likely in the same nerve cells to influence the wanting of both types of rewards, end quote. That's a mouthful, but what it means is that cravings for addictive drugs or for sex or for porn all tap into the same mechanisms and brain pathways, with delta phosphate driving the bus. It also means that behavioral addictions exist and share the same fundamental mechanisms and brain changes as do drug addictions. Does this mean that sexual conditioning is exactly like an addiction? No, of course not. Sexual conditioning is a natural process that all adolescents experience. Addiction is a pathology. Nevertheless, delta phosphate is common to both. Its instructions are to remember and repeat rewarding behaviors, whether it's smoking a cigarette, or having sex with a female who smells like death, or surfing the internet for your favorite fetish porn. If a teen is watching a lot of internet porn, where does sexual conditioning leave off and porn addiction begin? There's no simple answer because both share common brain mechanisms. Older guys can often tell when they slip into an addiction because they know what normal was for them before internet porn arrived. If a 23-year-old has only known regular porn use since age 12, how does he figure out that he's crossing the line into compulsive use? Now that hardcore streaming videos are available to any age, humanity has entered a new paradigm. Obviously, internet porn is not sex, but it certainly activates our built-in dopamine response to sexual stimulation over and over. Beyond sexual stimulation, internet porn has unique properties that can keep dopamine surging, novelty, searching and seeking, material that shocks or surprises, all elevate dopamine independently of one another. As soon as dopamine starts to drop, you can click to the next image or video and jack it up again. You can't do that with a Playboy magazine or a DVD rental. Some users maintain this high arousal state, which means high dopamine, for hours, deliberately deferring ejaculation. Many use porn without masturbating. They watch on airplanes or at work, or maybe in the libraries, or on their smartphones at school, or maybe they start after dinner and surf porn until they fall asleep at 2 a.m. Not only has the content of porn evolved to be ever more extreme, so has the delivery system. Porn is now omnipresent, free and accessible to every age at any time, which brings us to the most technologically adept segment of the population. Adolescence. There's an elephant in the room here, which we haven't talked about yet. It's the adolescent brain. An adolescent brain is not an adult brain with less experience. It is anatomically, biochemically, and physiologically different from a child's or an adult's brain. Those differences fall into two main categories. The first is an imbalance of power between the thrill-seeking parts of the primitive brain and our more evolved rational brain. The second is an explosion of new brain connections, followed by rapid pruning and reorganization. Let's start with the first feature. During adolescence, a temporary imbalance develops. The sex, drugs, and rock and roll part of the brain is in overdrive. That's the reward circuit. While at the same time, the let's give this some thought part of the brain is still under construction. In fact, those frontal lobes won't reach full maturity until about age 25. Now, how does the adolescent reward circuit produce much stronger go-for-it signals? First, the teen brain squirts out far more dopamine than does an adult brain. Second, the brain's sensitivity to dopamine and other exciting neurochemicals is significantly higher. It peaks around age 15. This combination of more dopamine and more dopamine receptors sends novelty seeking skyrocketing. In fact, one study found that teen brains respond to anything perceived as exciting with 2 to 4 times the reward circuitry activation of adults. Not only are teen brains pumping out more dopamine and other reward neurochemicals, they produce higher levels of delta phos-B. As we saw already, delta phos-B is at the heart of sexual conditioning. One outcome of higher levels of dopamine and delta phos-B is that adolescent brains are far more vulnerable to addictions than are adult. Teens also have weaker stop signals. Unfortunately, the sex hormones that initiate teen sensitivity to thrills do nothing to speed up the development of the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe controls impulses, inhibits inappropriate behavior, and weighs the consequences of one's actions. A teen brain is like a car with a Ferrari engine and Ford Pinto brakes, in that the urges from the high-powered reward circuit can overwhelm the underdeveloped frontal lobe. Teens often base their choices on emotional impulses and have trouble perceiving consequences of going for it. Again, this is no accident. This imbalance of power has an evolutionary purpose. All social mammals exhibit the same characteristics during adolescence: increased risk-taking and increased sensation-seeking. Both helped animals get fired up about sex, leave home, explore new territory, and eventually find mates outside their group. The purpose? To discourage inbreeding. Today, adolescent humans, impelled by these very same urges, encounter hazards that they never evolved to face. Motorcycles, fast cars, recreational drugs, video games, junk food, and of course, internet porn. The second major feature of the adolescent brain is an explosion of new nerve connections during early adolescence, perhaps 50 to 100 billion new ones, which is followed by rapid pruning and reorganization. So the brain begins shrinking after age 11, but its functions gradually become more orderly and efficient. This process allows the teen to learn all about his environment and then wire in important new experiences and memories using the fire together, wire together principle. To understand this better, think of forming pathways or ruts in the brain. The more often you take a new path, the easier it becomes. These ruts become memories, skills, habits, even ways of coping. The key point, you are more likely to use an established path even if you don't want to. It becomes the rut of least resistance. Top adolescent brain expert Jay Gee describes the process as the use it or lose it principle. Quote, those cells and connections that are used will survive and flourish. Those cells and connections that are not used will wither and die. So if a teen is doing music or sports or academics, those are the cells and connections that will be hardwired. If they are lying on the couch or playing video games or watching MTV, those are the cells and connections that are going to survive, unquote. There's no doubt that the cells and connections for sexuality will survive and flourish during adolescence. The question is, what input will shape these circuits? Just ponder the enormous diversity of environments and customs that human adolescents have adapted to over the ages. This adaptability worked well for a wide range of sexual customs and practices involving real mates. Today, though, a 13-year-old's sexual pathways may be molded by hardcore pixels and constant novelty, perhaps years before his first sexual encounter or even his first kiss. Clicking a mouse has replaced leaving one's tribe to search the savannah for fertile mates. While glued to a screen, a young guy is not learning courtship skills or interacting with potential mates, the very tasks for which adolescence evolved, and his brain is not wiring his sexual response to flirting, pheromones, or three-dimensional partners of normal proportions. In conclusion, as Jay Phelan, UCLA biology professor, and co-author of Mean Genes says, all excessive stimulations of the reward circuitry that are not the behaviors for which it originally evolved are problematic. Like crack and Krispy Kreme donuts, internet porn is another manifestation of mismatch. The phenomenon of our modern world deviating from the world to which we became adapted over evolutionary time. This is not yet appreciated for internet porn, unquote. Thanks for listening. The science behind this presentation can be found on www.yourbrainonporn.com below the presentation itself.